Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 97 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. Today's tip comes to us from special guest Danielle Kunkle Roberts.
So something that I've used to increase my audience retention in both my live speaking seminars and in the webinars that we host online is that I mentioned in my introduction that I have some bonus material for them coming up at the end of the presentation. And this will be some form of a takeaway that my audience members can use to further their education on the topic about which I'm speaking. This type of bonus can come in the form of an invite to an additional training, such as a deeper dive webinar on a more focused topic. It can also be just a URL, a link to a page on your website where they can download a free ebook or a PDF guide. And sometimes it could even be just a nugget of information, a specific question that you know a lot of your audience has, and that you're going to give them your best secret tip in the last 5 minutes of the webinar. This technique has worked really well for me. I find that most people will absolutely stay tuned throughout your entire speech, simply so that they don't miss that freebie that you've promised to them at the end. If you create an ebook or a PDF guide that you give them at the end of the speech, this is also another way that you can capture their email address and get them on your email list so that you can continue the conversation down the road. So you might send them to a page on your website where they sign up for a freebie by putting in their name and their email address. And it's a really great top of the funnel technique as well.
Stick around. And after the break, we'll hear more from Danielle as she shares how she teaches folks about the exciting and alluring world of Medicare. Welcome back. Love it or hate it, really, there's no arguing that the U.S. healthcare system can be complex. There are details and bureaucracies and costs and restrictions and benefits and more. Once you reach age 65 or you acquire some significant disabilities, it gets even more complex. With Medicare, its assorted parts, supplements, deadlines, costs, plans, and more as well. Enter Danielle Kunkle Roberts. Danielle has built a business teaching folks how to navigate this world. She speaks to groups new to Medicare to help them understand what they need. She trains folks both in person and online and has to keep them engaged the whole time. She also teaches other insurance agents through continuing education about this stuff so they can serve their clients even better. This week, Danielle and I talk about just how she does that. We talk about tips for managing webinars, for engaging folks in dry material, and for navigating the political discussions that inevitably come up in any U.S. discussion of healthcare policy. Danielle Kunkle Roberts is a founding partner and senior executive at Boomer Benefits, a national agency specializing in Medicare-related insurance products since 2005. Serving thousands of Medigap policyholders in 47 states, Boomer Benefits helps baby boomers learn how to navigate Medicare. She is a nationally recognized expert in the Medicare sector of health insurance industry and a member of the Forbes Finance Council. You can learn more about Danielle's background in the show notes over at 2minutetalktips.com/Medicare. Now, let's meet Danielle. So Danielle, thank you so much for joining me on 2-Minute Talk Tips this week.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is awesome. I really like the field that you speak in, and I've encountered a lot more of that type of stuff, as listeners of my other show, The Strokecast, are probably well aware of. I've been encountering a lot more of that medical system bureaucracy and working with support groups that have actually had guests come in to talk specifically about Medicare and to engage a crowd of folks who need to know this stuff and are also simultaneously dealing with some auditory and visual and language processing issues. It can be a very challenging field. But before we get too deep into that, what's your earliest memory of being on a stage?
I think my earliest time I was ever on a stage was probably in first or second grade. There was a school Christmas pageant, and I was the Statue of Liberty and had to say the Pledge of Allegiance to a crowd of parents.
I love this random collection of stuff that goes into these primary school pageants.
Isn't it funny?
That's awesome.
The memories that you take away from all that stuff, and also just the impact they have on your future experiences. I remember volunteering and being really excited instead of nervous. It was a fun experience for me being so little, but it was a great opportunity just to get up there on stage and really get to have an idea if it's something that you would enjoy doing. I think a lot of that early confidence probably came from my mom reading to me so much when I was a kid. And I would repeat the stories back to her and tell her that I wanted to read the books to her. And so when I had an opportunity to stand in front of a bunch of people and I knew the Pledge of Allegiance, I was sure I could do it. I marched right out there and did.
What's really interesting now is just starting to encounter more of the research that's coming out of just the impact that growing up in a reading household and growing up surrounded by books can have on people later in life.
Yeah, I often think about, if I hadn't had that opportunity, if she wasn't a reader and she hadn't spent all that early time with me, just how much that would have changed my life. Because, later in life, I got a journalism and English degree. And I know that those subject matters were just things that I loved from being a little kid who was read to and had to develop my vocabulary early and see her love of reading and my grandmother's love of reading. And it really does shape you later in life to enjoy so much reading, writing, and also speaking, I think.
Sounds like even before that pageant, then you wanted to be the voice in front of an audience, wanting to read to your mother and read the books for her.
Yeah, that's right. She had a friend come over once, my Aunt Rhonda. I call her an aunt, but she was my mom's good friend in high school. And I ran up to her with a book. I think it was the Little Black Sambo book, and said, I want to read you this book. I'm going to read you this book. And my mom said, well, you can't read. And so then I sat down and I read the story to her, just knowing the scenes and remembering what my mom had told me. And I remember then my mom saying, oh, you're just such a ham, and it was fun for me to get to present like that. And that was probably maybe an early indication that I would enjoy some of this stuff later in life.
Absolutely. What strikes me about that, too, is that it also hints at one of the things that we teach speakers these days, and that's you don't have to have it memorized. You don't have to get every word there. You need to internalize the story and share the story. So even if you can't decipher the ink that turns into words at that age, the story, the visuals, and you can make the point that way.
Absolutely. And it's kind of like a slide presentation. If you think about it, if you're speaking in front of a group of people and you've got your slides, those are really there just to trigger your memory about what you need to talk about next. And you don't have to have all the words on the slide and read them. And in fact, if you do that, it's not going to work for you, but just being able to trigger that memory about the topic that you need to address next. Reading a book with pictures in it is a lot of early practice for that.
Absolutely. And those pictures in that are published in that book, they're also then reinforcing that message for you as the little kid being read to, as that's how that message is helping to land. That picture, that image is supporting the author, is supporting your mother as the speaker, and really helping that story land with you.
Certainly.
Let's talk a little bit more about the stuff you talk about today, which is a lot of focus on Medicare webinars and teaching folks how to navigate the Medicare system, which is its own kind of complex beast. But before we get into that, I know we have a number of listeners who are not in the United States and so don't have to deal with this. So what is Medicare?
Okay. Yeah. Great point. So Medicare is the America's national health insurance program for people age 65 and older, and also some people younger than that who have disabilities and have qualified for Medicare due to that. And so although here in the United States, we don't have national health insurance for everyone, Medicare truly is a federal program to deliver health insurance for people when they're getting ready to retire, so that they have those benefits to take care of them during their golden years.
And it's one of those things that fits into the broader collection of insurance and billing and hospital systems, and doctor systems, and is sort of a part of that, rather than, it's not like you go to a Medicare doctor and just don't have to deal with any of the paperwork.
Yeah, you still have all the insurance paperwork. Such fun stuff.
So how did you get into Medicare training? Why would you want to dive into this morass of red tape and bureaucracy?
Yeah, I like the word to use, beast, because that's exactly what it is. And so in 2004, I left a career in temporary staffing. And I knew that I wanted to start a business and I wanted to sell something, but I didn't want to have humans be my product, like in staffing. They're very unreliable and they no-show to jobs sometimes. And so I was looking for a product that I could sell, and I thought I would be good at sales. And I actually went to an interview with a girlfriend of mine that was checking out an insurance company. And so I just sat in on the group interview that they did. And by the time I left that meeting, I knew right away I had found the thing that I wanted to sell, because it's a product that, of course, doesn't have any inventory. There's no shelf life. It doesn't expire or spoil. It's really an idea backed by a guarantee, but it's something that you can do to help other people. And so I went and got my life and health insurance license and started an agency. And in the beginning, we were working with group health insurance products, and I would cold call businesses and want to quote their health insurance programs. And then that led into a lot of individual health insurance for certain people that were, self-employed and didn't need group insurance. And one of the things we kept running into with both of those groups, and a lot of times these people, business owners, self-employed people, would be in their 40s. Maybe they've got a family that they're insuring. They would say to me, this has been so helpful. Do you by any chance know anything about Medicare? Because my mom is turning 65 and this stuff is so confusing. And I probably had to hear that maybe 6 or 7 different times from different people to finally say, yeah, let me go check into this, because clearly there's a need here. And these relatively smart people were telling me it was a lot more confusing than the insurance that I was explaining to them in their under 65 world. So we got licensed, my brother and I, we owned this agency together. We got licensed to sell Medicare products. And it really is a product that needs education, because it's not possible for you to go out and purchase a supplemental insurance policy if you don't first truly understand how Medicare works. And here in America, we are usually provided our health insurance choices throughout our working lives by our employer. We might have a choice of 2 deductibles, or perhaps they have an HMO or a PPO plan that you can choose. But when you turn 65, you're thrown into this national health insurance program that has 4 different parts and 10 standardized Medigap plans from hundreds of different insurance companies, plus a drug program that got added later. Then every state has 20 to 30 options to choose there for your drug coverage. And so if you just think about someone that's always had those couple of choices their whole lives, and then suddenly they're facing this beast and trying to figure out how that works. And it's just really overwhelming and very stressful for people, because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to find themselves in a hospital and come home to $20,000 worth of bills. And so I recognized a need that the education piece needed to be there. So we started doing presentations here locally. We did them for cancer support groups. I've done them at hospitals and tons of employers. So other group insurance agents that I knew would invite us out to do a lunch and learn at their business. And all the employees who were approaching age 60 to 65 would come in, and we would present and we would teach them how their original federal benefits work. And then we would get into what their supplemental options were. And the need for that has just continued to grow, of course, as the baby boomers have been aging into Medicare at about a rate of 10,000 people per day.
It's really about listening to the audience and then figuring out what you can do to provide that.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like the revenue model there then is you're providing the education about the program, but your agency then also has the supplemental products that can provide the additional coverage for Medicare. Because as we talked about in the beginning, even though it's a federal insurance program for folks, 65 and older and those who have disabilities, it's not the only insurance program you need. You need to supplement that with other things.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got, just like your current insurance that you've had during your working years, you've got a copay at the doctor and you've got a deductible for your hospital stay. Medicare has all those same things. So we train them or teach them all the things they need to know about Medicare. And then on the back end, we can sell them a supplemental policy and a drug plan to go with that.
This can be a very challenging audience as folks are getting older. They may be encountering bureaucracy because this stuff is always changing on the back end. So you got to deal with the changes.
Yeah.
Folks may already be worried or stressed about dealing with issues related to aging, what happens when their partner passes away, and all of that stuff. How do you keep this crowd focused on the material and help really communicate that with them?
That's a great question, because it is a topic that is not only overwhelming, but it's also really dry. So one of the first things I do in any presentation is to make a joke about Medicare. I will usually start off my presentation with something like, I know that you have all just been waiting on pins and needles, so excited to come to this Medicare presentation today. And wow, do I have an exciting delivery for you. And this will always get a laugh out of the crowd, and it sort of disarms them a little bit, lets them know that I'm not going to just lecture them for the next 45 minutes about all this stuff that they really don't care to get into. It is a necessary evil, and they know that they need to be there and they know that they need to learn it, but it's also something that people dread. And so I think putting just a little bit of humor into the presentation early is one of the things to keep them occupied. And then something else that I think has always been useful, at least for me, is presenting in person. I will move or change positions or walk out into the audience maybe every 20 to 30 seconds. If you just stand behind a lectern and, flip through your slides, that is a quick way to make people fall asleep because of it being such a dry subject matter. So if you move around a little, you stop for a moment, you ask your audience some questions sometimes. Even later, as we've gotten into some of the live video that we've put out on YouTube, same thing. I'll change up the angle of the camera angle every 20 seconds or so, or I'll slide in a graphic that just kind of keeps that new flickering image in front of their eyes so that they aren't just hearing me drone on about this really dry topic. I find that if you kind of switch up the view throughout going over this information, their eyes will track you around the room. And same thing on a video. There's lots of statistics to prove that if you just have one image and someone talking, that you're going to have very little watch time on that type of presentation. If you can use a highlighter or a spotlight or something that moves around the screen with you, that's going to keep their attention much better than just listening to your voice.
So what is the most difficult part about teaching this material?
I have found one of the benefits of teaching this material is that I'm going into something where people really need a handle on this information. So they're dependent on understanding the things I need to teach them.
It is really life and death and financial success versus bankruptcy types of issues.
Absolutely. And people really don't know this because throughout their working lives, they have taxes that are being pulled out of their paycheck to pre-fund their future hospital benefits. And they assume that that money is also going to pay for all of Medicare. And so one of the most shocking things for them is to turn 65 and suddenly learn that Medicare isn't free. And we've actually seen people that have, been ready to retire. And then when they learned this, decided to work for a few more years because they needed to save more for retirement because Medicare isn't free and there is cost sharing as you go along. And, the information is overwhelming and really important at the same time. And I think probably the toughest part of teaching it is just how massive the topic is. And there's a lot of moving parts. So we really have to focus in our presentations on breaking it down into digestible pieces of information, because there's 4 parts to Medicare. You have a part that's hospital, a part that's outpatient, a part that's drug coverage, and then a part that you don't sign up for at the Social Security office that's actually an optional type of coverage. And so those 4 moving parts are so confusing for people, and it really helps if you can address them one at a time. And something else I often will go over to give them just something to relate to is we will use in our presentations, if they think about the old style of Blue Cross and Blue Shield insurance, that is hospital insurance and outpatient insurance. And this is how Medicare was built.
Yeah. I never even knew that was the distinction between the two.
Absolutely, that is. And that's sort of a picture you can put in front of them. That little logo is how Medicare was originally developed, was to be after the style of a Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And even though all insurance now provides those type of benefits, breaking those pieces down one by one and helping them understand how the foundation of their coverage works first, that's really the toughest part to tackle. Another thing about Medicare that's really confusing for a lot of people are the election periods. So you first cover with them what Medicare costs and what types of things it covers and what it doesn't. But then there's all these deadlines and penalties. So you have an election period that you can sign up for that surrounds your 65th birthday. And if you miss that period.
And by election in this case, we mean a period of choosing, not like election as in voting for something.
Correct. So you could call it also an enrollment period. And this is when they have this certain amount of time that they have to get these things done by. And there's multiple different enrollment periods throughout the year, and each of them fit a different piece of the Medicare spectrum. So you also have to kind of tell them what are the most important enrollment periods that you need to worry about, and then separating the things that maybe right now are not so important. And because there's so many moving parts there, that's why a presentation in either a seminar with slides or a webinar with slides really helps them to get the visual picture along with the audio portion, which helps them to sort of cement that knowledge that you've given them and walk away with that picture of how the coverage works in their mind.
Well, that's great. I think what's really key there is you're really talking about building that foundational knowledge, going back to that, how it originally came about. And I think when you start, building a presentation and educating folks becomes easier when you can start with, this is where it comes from. This is the basics that everything builds from. And then you can start to see a logical progression into the more advanced or detail of the material versus just hitting folks with a whole bunch of details right up front.
Yeah, you really can't just lump it all in there and spring the entire package on them. I always tell them, you've been bombarded by all these mailers and telemarketers, and they know you're turning 65, so they're sending you all this information, and you need to set all of that aside because that's putting the cart before the horse. Understanding Medicare starts with the parts. And so you go over those first 4 parts and let them get that piece down. And then throughout your speech, you build upon that foundation.
Right. And in effect, you're telling the story of Medicare. And anytime you can incorporate storytelling into a presentation, it's more engaging for the audience and it helps them come along on the journey with you.
Absolutely. And telling stories of client examples, and especially when you get into the deadlines and penalties, talking about real clients and things that have happened to folks that we've worked with and helping them hear that story really gives them the opportunity to visualize that. And it makes it real so that they know that, hey, I'm not the only person out here that's confused about this, that a lot of people feel freaked out right. At the Medicare beast, so that also sometimes can relieve some of their anxiety as well.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about now how the webinars fit into your business, because one of the things that makes webinars obviously different from a face-to-face presentation is that it's nationwide or really worldwide. Mm-hmm. But when you factor in what's happening with Medicare, with all the different state plans, How do you make a webinar that you may be conducting in Illinois relevant to somebody who's watching from Nevada?
Yeah, so that is true because there are state laws that affect pieces of Medicare differently. For example, on Medicare supplements, most of the states have standardized plans, but there's a couple of states where the plans are different. So one of the things that we do in the webinars, and kind of how we got on, I get the webinars to begin with, was after doing those lunch and learns at the employers, I realized that there would always be people that were left out because they worked in a different facility or they worked on a different shift. And there was no recording because it was a live presentation. So we came up with the idea of the webinars so that when we do the presentation, it can be recorded and then the company has that to show the employees later. But also if they're a large company and they've got people working in different facilities or even different states, they can attend right from their own home computer or office computer and attend a webinar that goes over all those basics no matter where they are. So when you do a webinar on a topic like Medicare, you're going to work on all of the basics. And then later in the presentation, you can bring in some specifics to say, hey, if you live in this state, the rules are going to be a little different. And one of the things that we do is we provide some of that backup information on our website. So if I'm speaking with someone to say, hey, the rules in California are a little different, you actually have an annual open enrollment, visit the state page on our website because I'll have more information for you about that there. And this really helps people to have something to walk away from the webinar with. And another thing I like about the webinars, or at least how that we've done them, is instead of making them a sales pitch where at the end we're asking for a phone number or getting them to sign up for something, we invite anyone and everyone to the webinar, even people who might have TRICARE or military insurance or VA insurance who may not even ever have a need to buy a policy from us. We make them open to anyone who needs the information, and we make them just educational. And you can still sell lots of policies just by doing the storytelling throughout your presentation, such as, hey, this situation happened with this client, and let me tell you what my team did that was effective in resolving that. And so you're teaching them how to avoid those things, but they're also hearing, hey, if I just buy through this company, they're going to handle these problems for me on the back end, and I won't be all alone with Medicare. And you can really do a presentation without having to launch a program or sign up people. If you tell them right in the beginning, there's not going to be a sales pitch at the end. I find that our retention rate is so much higher doing that because they're not waiting for that other shoe to drop as you're teaching them all the stuff they need to know about Medicare.
So not everybody in your audience needs to be a potential customer of yours in order for doing this to make business sense.
Yeah, that's right. And when you do it like that, you'll get so many referrals because even those people that may not, let's say it is someone that has the military retiree and they've got TRICARE for life, and these are benefits that already coordinate with Medicare and they don't need a Medigap plan. That person has a bunch of friends who didn't retire from the military, and that person will let them know, hey, I attended this webinar. It was really informative. You should check it out. And I have people even after the webinars that will email me and say, hey, I don't need this insurance, but wow, I really appreciate that you let me sit in. And by the way, I'm giving your name to these people. So being open to letting people come in and get the education that they need really does result in great brand awareness.
You can go out and provide that service ahead of time, and it really also helps establish you then as thought leaders and experts in this space.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you want for people to think. You want them to say, wow, I really learned so much in this webinar today, and this lady knows what she's talking about. And you'll find that they will hunt you down afterward on LinkedIn or they'll follow you to Facebook and they'll just shoot questions to you, and just want to be as open and as engaging as you can so that people walk away with that good impression of you as an educator.
When we talk about these issues and talk about, being open to folks and providing this kind of value, one of the challenges with Medicare is that, especially these last few years, it is a political issue. That's part of the discussion around Social Security, around healthcare system, around budget deficits, whether it should be or shouldn't be. And and so much more that's always happening in whatever's going on with the president and the Congress and the courts getting involved in how it all ties into the Affordable Care Act or the Obamacare program, many folks know, and all of this gets lumped together. So how do you keep the politics out of it or keep it as a nonpartisan discussion? Or is that even something you can do or should try to do?
I love this question, Bill, because I have broken up so many fights on Facebook over this. They will come and, read some of our material there, or they'll join our Facebook group to ask a Medicare question. And someone inevitably responds with, something political. They love the president. They hate the president. They love the Congress. They hate the Congress. You've got one group of people that pays more for Medicare due to their income, and they're angry about that. And you have other people that think those people should absolutely pay more for Medicare. So we do a lot of management of that in the group setting. I think for the live trainings, though, or the things that we do in a webinar, and they're sending in their questions in an email format, it's a lot easier to manage. But for me, having a background in journalism, really my whole college education was about how to be objective and how to cover a story topic without letting the audience truly know your own personal political views. And there are some great, newscasters that you can watch. And I can think of several that I have absolutely no idea their personal views on politics because they're so good at this. And then there are others where it's just all over them. You can tell exactly how they feel personally. So I think it's easy for me to be objective. And if we get a question like that in a live seminar, I usually will deflect it with a joke or some humor. And just sort of letting them know that that's funny, but we're not going to dwell on that conversation today. Or I'll say something like, well, that's for another presentation. Maybe you can help me with that and sort of push that question back a little bit. One of the things, of course, that's really hot in America right now is this topic of Medicare for all. And this was part of the last election, and it looks like it's shaping up to be part of the next presidential election as well. And because there are so many other countries out there that have national health insurance, it is an interest for a lot of people here in the United States. And so when those questions come up, I try to give them facts. Hey, if this gets implemented, what I've heard is X, Y, and Z. However, I don't know about these pieces. And I often will tell them that a lot of how that legislation will ultimately end up will have to do with what Congress we have in place if and when that type of thing gets approved. So if you report on the factual pieces and just keep it really objective, that helps to stem any audience fights over, who loves Trump or doesn't, and all the other political figures that we have out there today as well.
So that becomes then drawing that strong line between, describing the current situation as it is and how to work with that effectively versus advocating for a change of the system.
Yeah. And if there's a topic that's politically hot surrounding the subject that you're going to be speaking about, you'll really help yourself out by spending 15 minutes, 20 minutes Googling news on that before your speech. So if you sit down and educate yourself, let's say it's a congressional bill that's up for votes, find out the facts of the bill. And then when that question comes along, you can respond with those facts instead of guessing, which way it's going to go based on a particular legislator or a particular political party. Just get the neutral facts and be ready to present those or to answer a question with that information, as opposed to leaning one way or the other and assuming that the person that asked that question or that your audience is leaning that way. You really could do yourself a lot of trouble if you reveal your own personal opinion on these things. So facts are your best friend. Right.
And I think a lot of times, a lot of those discussions that come up and a lot of those internet arguments are based on headlines and titles rather than actual details and what's behind it.
Yeah. Inflammatory things. That's right. The headlines can really be that way.
So, as you go through this process, and it's always changing, so you're always doing your own professional development and learning more and staying on top of this. And I imagine going to your own seminars and shows to in the field. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see other trainers or speakers making, and how can they avoid that?
So one thing that I see a lot in continuing education courses that I've taught. So when you're an insurance agent, you have to take so many hours every license cycle of education, and you can sign up to be an educator. And so I've, over the years, taught a number of continuing education courses to other agents about Medicare. And when I myself sit in a speech and I listen to someone else delivering that education, one of the things I always notice is when they promote themselves too much. So you have to remember when you're starting your speech, I always keep that information about me, if I can, to one slide or two at the most, and try to get done with that piece in less than 60 seconds. Because if you stand up there and tell them all the reasons why you're such a great speaker and you got this award and that award, they really don't care. What they want to know is if you're credible, and that's going to come across in the way that you present. So you really don't need to spend too much promoting yourself and your product or your place in the world. Let that shine during the rest of your presentation instead of hammering it so hard on up front where you kind of see the audience lose interest so quickly. Another thing that really is important for webinars is you never want to run over the allotted time. So people are giving you their personal time, and it's hard to sit through a webinar that's longer than 60 minutes. So I try to keep it just below that. And then I let them know, hey, I'll stay as long as I need to afterward to answer all of your questions, but we're going to keep the presentation to under an hour. And then you really need to meet that because they have other things to do. And especially with a topic like Medicare, if you head in and talk about it for 3 hours, no one will pay any attention. They'll be long gone. So sticking to the time limit that you've given them is so important. You will get complaints if you run past that, especially in a webinar situation. And you just really have to respect your audience's time.
You know, I don't think I've ever seen a presentation where people walked out of the audience saying, you know, I wish that speaker had gone longer.
That's exactly right. They're not hoping for anything longer than that. You know, their legs have fallen asleep and they're nodding off out there. You want to keep it short, and you win bonus points, of course, if you can keep it under the limit you promised. Absolutely.
And if you're part of a program, anytime, if you can shave 5 or 10 minutes off of some time when you're done and you've shared your story, having the event organizer know that you can do that and can help them get back on track when the event is running behind can really give you bonus points in the idea in the mind of the person who invited you to speak at that event in the first place.
Absolutely. That's a great point. You're going to win points there and probably be invited back again in the future.
The other thing you mentioned there that I think is really interesting is that the idea of not only taking continuing education, but actually going ahead and becoming a presenter for continuing education also gives a great opportunity for somebody to get some more stage time if that's something they're interested in. What's involved in becoming a person who does the continuing education?
Yeah, so here in Texas, you can apply directly with the Department of Insurance, and you have to put together an outline of the topic, and it actually has to be a detailed outline showing how many minutes you're going to spend on each thing. So you write out an outline, and then there's an overview, which talks about what the subject matter is about, and you have to tell them the presentation style in which you're doing it. So if you put together a course, and usually continuing education, a lot of them are an hour long, but some of them are 8 hours long. And if you put together an outline that breaks all those pieces down, there's certain things that they want you to hit depending on the subject matter, but it's actually a lot easier to get approved to teach continuing education than you might think. If you put together a good outline and you just submit it to TDI, which is Texas Department of Insurance, I have just faxed them over in the past. And then they will write back. And I've never actually had a course that's been turned down. However, my outlines are pretty thorough. So you just want to make sure that you're in your outline that you're submitting, that if they have any requirements about certain subject matter, that you hit all of those items. So for example, one of the continuing education courses that I teach here in Texas is an 8-hour Medicare related certification course. And this is a course where I'm covering 8 hours of subject material about Medicare for other agents, including not just the basics of Medicare, but the marketing laws, what you can and can't do when you're selling these products to consumers. And then there's an exam at the end. And when I am presenting to a group of Medicare beneficiaries on one of my webinars, I then can use that as a piece of credibility. Hey, not only do I know how to teach this subject matter to individuals with Medicare, but I also teach the subject matter for other agents like myself who want to work with individuals like you. And it's a little feather in your hat that you are an instructor for a course like that.
What's really cool about that, what's really interesting about that too, is when you talk about putting together that outline and just defining what you're going to do with that course, what the objectives are, those details that go into it, how much time you want to spend in each area. Really, that's what we generally should be doing for preparing presentations to anyone. You go ahead, you figure out your goal, you define your message, you figure out what you want people to be able to do, and then you do the work and the planning to craft your outline in detail so you can then go ahead and fill everything in. And when you do that prep work and get on stage, it just seems natural to the audience.
You bet. And if you put that kind of time in up front on your outline, if you're going to be using slides as part of your presentation, it's really easy to make your slides because you've already done that work in your outline showing the order of events. And so you go back to your outline and you can build your slides from that. If you put in some good time up front, you're kind of making that back end work easier for yourself as well.
Well, Danielle, this has been absolutely fantastic. I've learned a lot, and you've got a lot of really great information in there. So I hope this has been helpful for a lot of folks. If folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, or check out your webinars, where should they go?
So our agency on the web is boomerbenefits.com. And you can find on our website right on the home page, about the middle of the page, there's a link there that says attend a webinar. And you can go there to sign up for our webinar. You can also sign up for a 6-day email course that I teach Medicare on video, one email at a time. And if you happen to be on Facebook, we've got a great Facebook page with over 70,000 followers, and we've been voted one of the best Facebook pages for baby boomers. So just go to Facebook and type in Boomer Benefits. And that's a great place for you to hear about the upcoming webinars. You can also join our Facebook group where we take questions from the public at any time, and we answer those Medicare questions right there on Facebook.
That is fantastic. And those links will also be available at 2minutetalktips.com/Medicare. And I would also encourage anyone who maybe you don't think you're going to, you need to learn about Medicare right now, go ahead and check out some of those webinars as well from a best practices standpoint, because you can look at content outside of your field and sometimes that's an easier opportunity to see how it's done well so that you can then apply those lessons to your own field as well.
Yeah, great tip.
So Danielle, thank you so much for joining us this week. This has been great. And yeah, I look forward to comments from folks who have dived into an area they never expected to.
Thanks so much. I've enjoyed it.
There are a few things I really want to call out from this discussion. The first is how Danielle found her niche. As she explained, she was selling traditional corporate health plans, and folks kept asking her about Medicare. That told her there was an untapped need. So she pivoted her focus to meet that need and became significantly more successful. That's one reason I recommend tracking all of the questions you get in a talk or presentation, even if you can answer them at that time. You want to look for patterns that keep coming up. They might highlight something you need to fix, or those questions could unlock the next major step in your career or business. But you won't know unless you keep track of them. It also wasn't a direct focus of our discussion, but Danielle offered up 5 tips to running an effective webinar. First, it's hard to sit through a webinar that's longer than 60 minutes, so don't schedule them for longer. Second, finish early if at all possible. I don't think I've ever heard somebody say, boy, I wish that webinar was longer. 3, keep things visually moving on the screen to keep folks engaged and looking at your webinar window and less focused on that other Facebook window they probably have open up. 4, promise to make materials or key takeaway resources available at the end so folks have another reason to stick around. And 5, promise in advance that you'll stay on to answer any questions after you end the main portion of the webinar. So I think that's going to be valuable in all of your webinars, regardless of whether they're Medicare related or not. I also have another update from Danielle about Medicare's open enrollment that makes this episode even more timely. I'm releasing this episode on January 22nd, so Danielle sent this update. Open enrollment period. From January 1st to March 31st of each year, Medicare allows beneficiaries enrolled in a Medicare Advantage plan to make a one-time switch in their coverage. They can return original Medicare and add a Part D drug plan, or they can switch from one Medicare Advantage plan to another. Beneficiaries are otherwise locked into their Medicare Advantage plan for the rest of the year. So this is a great enrollment period to take advantage of if you, for some reason, do not like your current plan. So yeah, Danielle and I covered a lot of ground in this week's episode. Everything from the tactical aspects of training and presenting to some of the details about Medicare for those of you who need to be familiar with Medicare or have a relative that needs to be familiar with Medicare. So check out the various resources that we have available. Head on over to 2minutetalktips.com/Medicare to find all of Danielle's links. Be sure to also subscribe for free to 2-Minute Talk Tips in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Share this episode with a friend, colleague, or relative with the link 2minutetalktips.com/Medicare. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.